What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is July 1st, 2026, exactly 8:55 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 22nd book, which is really 3 books in one. We are in Volume 3 of the history of the Russian Revolution, written by Leon Trotsky. Rest in peace to that man. For today's episode, episode 41, we will be reading Chapter 40, the Military Revolutionary Committee. There's a typo over here. If you're looking on the horizontal live stream, there's a typo in the chapter. But that's been the only typo I've seen so far. Every time we read these books, no matter what book it is, there always seems to be a typo in it. Who is doing the editing process? Who is doing the editing process for these major works? But I digress. I'm looking forward to reading this chapter. Chapter 38 was very impactful. Chapter 39 was very impactful, and so far Volume 3 has been very good. If I had to rank it, if I had to rank the volumes I'm liking so far in this book, Volume 1 and then 3 and then 2, I'm gonna keep it real. Volume 2 was very dense, almost at times very pessimistic, nihilistic, and dark at times, but that's because of the counter-revolution. But as we saw by the end of Volume 2, the Bolsheviks were able to overcome, and it was like an action movie. It was like, you know, a movie at the end where the villains die, the Sith are killed, the Jedis are back on top, Ewoks are dancing around. Shit was actually pretty dope. So I'm looking forward to reading Volume 3 as we are continuing to see the Bolsheviks solidify power, the working class of Russia continue to gain class consciousness. It's starting to become more solidified that the Bolsheviks are a force who will now fully reach their full historical destiny of seizing the power. The working class are seizing power in Russia is what we are witnessing. And we're not even in the October Revolution. We're not even in the October Revolution. As we near the end of this book, I'm going to be giving more and more commentary on the totality of the work. And so far, what I was thinking about today while reading this book is that, yes, this book lived up to my expectations of revolutionary communist inspiration. This book changed my mind on a lot of things. It really enlightened me on, you know, what does it mean to gain class consciousness? What does it mean for the proletariat to seize the means of production? What does it mean to have a revolutionary vanguard party? A lot of these things were more elucidated over reading these chapters over the past month and a half. So I'm very, very, very glad and blessed that I was given life to be able to read this book and gain this insight. I'm also very surprised that Trotsky as a character, because he was here through all of the events, but he has not written himself as some sort of central leading historical figure. Granted, he was in prison for large parts of the, you know, early parts of 1917, but I'm very impressed about the humbleness that Trotsky treats himself when writing the story. You get what I'm saying? And I think that lends towards the historicity and objectivity that this book is aiming for, in the sense that, you know, Trotsky didn't just sort of make himself, you know, a main character, you know what I mean, of the events here. Throughout the book, there are shots at Stalin here and there. There's a lot of Lenin glazing, which Lenin does deserve. Lenin is that dude, you know what I mean? But, you know, I've gained a lot of insight through this book. Hopefully you have as well if you've been following along in the series. And I'm looking forward to reading what you all have to say about this book in the comments section or in the chat. We have the horizontal live stream going, and we also have the vertical live stream going. Looking forward to reading what you have to say. Please make sure you read the pinned comment so you are not quickly expelled to the re-education camp or to a gulag. We will quickly expel you bots, you trolls, you fascists, you racists, you monarchists, which surprisingly monarchists still exist in the big 2026. But I digress. You will be quickly expelled unless you are participating, following the rules. We will have law and order around here. That's what you fascists like. You fascists like law and order. Oh, that's what we'll do. We will quickly expel you. Okay? So without further ado, let's jump into Chapter 40, the Military Revolutionary Committee. In spite of the change of mood beginning toward the end of July, the social revolutionaries and Mensheviks dominated the reorganized Petrograd garrison all through August. The proletariat was disarmed. The Red Guard had kept only a few thousand rifles. In those circumstances, notwithstanding the fact that the masses were again coming over to the Bolsheviks, an insurrection might end in cruel defeat. The situation steadily changed, however, through September. After the revolt of the generals, the compromisers swiftly lost their following in the garrison. Distrust of the Bolsheviks was replaced by sympathy, or at the worst, by a watchful neutrality. But the sympathy was not active. The garrison remained, in a political sense, extremely shaky and, as Muzhiks are, suspicious. Aren't the Bolsheviks going to deceive us? Will they really give us peace and land? The majority of the soldiers still had no idea of fighting for these aims under the banner of the Bolsheviks. And since there remained in the garrison an almost completely unabsorbed minority hostile to the Bolsheviks, 5,000 or 6,000 Junkers, 3 Cossack regiments, a bicycle battalion, the bicycle battalion is back, and an armored car division, the outcome of a conflict in September seemed doubtful. To help things along, however, the course of events brought one more object lesson in which the fate of the Petrograd soldiers was shown to be inseparably bound up with the fate of the revolution and the Bolsheviks. The right to control bodies of armed men is a fundamental right of the state power. The first provisional government, wished upon the people by the executive committee, gave an obligation not to disarm and not to remove from Petrograd those military units that had taken part in the February overturn. This was the formal beginning of a military dualism, inseparable in essence from the double sovereignty. The major political disturbances of the succeeding months, the April demonstration, the July days, the preparation of the Kornilov insurrection, and its liquidation, each one inevitably ran into the question of the subordination of the Petrograd garrison. But conflicts between the government and the compromisers upon this theme were, after all, a family matter and ended amicably. With the Bolshevization of the garrison, things took a different turn. The soldiers themselves now began to recall that obligation given by the government to the executive committee in March and treacherously broken by them. On September 8th, the soldiers section of the Soviet put forward a demand that the regiments transferred to the front in connection with the July events be returned to Petrograd. This, while the members of the coalition were tearing their hair about how to get rid of the remaining regiments. In a number of provincial cities, things stood about the same way as in the capital. During July and August, the local garrison underwent a patriotic reconstruction. During August and September, the reconstructed garrisons underwent a process of Bolshevization. It was then necessary to begin over from the beginning. That is, once more undertake transfers and reconstructions. In preparing its blow against Petrograd, the government began with the provinces. Its political motives were carefully concealed under pretext of strategy. On September 27th, a joint session of the Soviets of Reval, that of the city and the fortress, adopted on the question of transfers the following resolution: to consider a regrouping of forces admissible only when agreed to in advance of the corresponding Soviets. The leaders of the Vladimir Soviet inquired of Moscow whether they should obey an order of Kerensky, transferring the whole garrison. The Moscow Regional Bureau of the Bolsheviks observed that orders of this kind are becoming systematic in relation to the revolutionary-minded garrisons. Before surrendering all its rights, the provisional government was trying to get hold of the fundamental right of every government, the right to dispose of armed bodies of men. So, after reading, the State and Revolution by Lenin, and also reading these first initial paragraphs of Trotsky here, us as communists need to know that the right to bear arms, or for the right for the workers to be armed, more specifically the proletariat to be armed, is fundamental to the success of a revolution and fundamental to the success of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And that right should never under any circumstances be abolished. That right should never be, just discarded. That is different, I argue, fundamentally, than what we have in America right now. The Second Amendment, the right for you to essentially continue to make richer these capital interests that want to sell weapons of mass destruction in our street and turn the working class against each other. There is a fundamental difference between individual civilians being armed in a bourgeois dictatorship versus the workers being armed when building the dictatorship of the proletariat. That is inherently different. All right? But continuing here, the reorganization of the Petrograd garrison was becoming all the more urgent because the coming Congress of Soviets was destined to carry to a decision, one way or another, the struggle for power. The bourgeois press, led by the cadet organ Wretch, was asserting every morning that we must not let the Bolsheviks choose the moment for a declaration of civil war. That meant we must strike a timely blow at the Bolsheviks. The attempt at a preliminary change of the correlation of forces in the garrison flowed inevitably from this premise. Arguments from strategic considerations looked sufficiently impressive after the fall of Riga and the loss of the Moon-Sunned Islands. District headquarters issued an order for the reorganization of the Petrograd units in preparation for an offensive. At the same time, upon the initiative of the compromisers, the matter was brought up in the soldiers section of the Soviet. Here the plan of the enemy was not bad, presenting a peremptory strategic demand to the Soviet to snatch their military support from under the feet of the Bolsheviks, or in case the Soviet resisted, to provoke a sharp conflict between the Petrograd garrison and the front, which was in need of supplementary forces and replacements. So let us never forget that World War I is still raging at this time, and Russia is still deeply involved. There are still soldiers on the front dying and fighting against the Germans during World War I. And even though the Bolsheviks are against the war, and vast amounts, I would say the majority of the Russian people are against World War I, the war is still raging, and Russia has continued to lose the war, especially after the February Revolution. So now the question is, how are they going to defend the Workers' Revolution, the Petrograd Soviet, and the other Soviets that have been established across the country if the Germans are encroaching? Should the workers be involved in this military defensive maneuver? All right, continuing here. The leaders of the Soviet, quite well aware of the trap that had been set for them, made up their minds to feel out the ground carefully before taking any irrevocable step. A flat refusal to fulfill the order was possible only if they were sure that the motives of the refusal would be correctly understood by the front. Otherwise, it might be more advantageous to carry out, by agreement with the trenches, a replacement of certain units of the garrison with revolutionary units from the front which were in need of rest. It was in this latter sense, as we have shown above, that the Reval Soviet had already spoken. All right, so okay. Shout out to Hoya Shukasha up in the chat for wishing me a blessed day. I appreciate that. But the question for you, good sir, is this: are we living through pre-revolutionary times in the West? Are we at the verge of seeing a overturn of the capitalist system and the end to American empire? That's a basic question we'll throw out. Let's see if you're paying attention. If you don't answer that question, we'll quickly escort you out the book club. So yeah, are we witnessing the end of American empire, and are we living through pre-revolutionary times in the West as the contradictions of our time continue to hasten, as we continue to see living conditions and working conditions depreciate and degrade for workers? Are we going to see eventually the working class live up to their historic destiny? Continuing here, the soldiers approached the question more brusquely. Take the offensive at the front now, in the middle of autumn? Reconcile themselves to a new winter campaign? No, they simply had no room in their heads for that idea. The patriotic press immediately opened fire on the garrison. The Petrograd regiments, grown fat in idleness, are betraying the front. The workers took the side of the soldiers. The Putilov men were the first to protest against the transfer of the regiments. From that time on, the question was never absent from the order of the day, either in barrack or factory. This drew together the two sections of the Soviet. The regiments began to support most heartily the demand that the workers be armed. So this is a very interesting thing, and this is something we don't think about now. What if soldiers could decide on whether a war is worth fighting? What if instead of rich, fat usually old white men, deciding that your sons, your daughters have to go die in Iraq and die in Afghanistan, the soldiers at least got to vote on it. What about that? This is what true democracy looks like. We don't live under democracy right now. We live under bourgeois dictatorship, where rich people get to decide that poor people have to die for their capital interest and benefit. And trust me, I know I had a friend who took his life after doing 2 stints in Iraq and Afghanistan. And many Americans, especially millennials of my generation, have a story of somebody who either lost their life, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've never been the same, or they never came back. So think about that. This is what happened in Russia. The Soviets are realizing that there's a trap that the bourgeois government is trying to establish. Hey, are you guys going to defend your little revolution? Because the Germans are knocking at the door of Petrograd. And so what did the Bolsheviks do? They actually execute true democracy. I would argue wartime communism. Let's ask the workers if they want to do the work of killing other people. And what do the soldiers say? No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go to the front in winter. We don't want to fucking die in snow over some bullshit war that we've been asking to end. Think about that, man. Think about that. That's what true democracy looks like. That's what true democracy looks like, man. All right, continuing here. So, attempting to kindle the patriotism of the masses by threatening the loss of Petrograd, the compromisers introduced into the Soviet on October 9th a motion to create a committee of revolutionary defense whose task should be to take part in the defense of the capital with the active cooperation of the workers, while refusing to assume responsibility for the so-called strategy of the provisional government, and in particular the removal of troops from Petrograd. The Soviet, nevertheless, had made no haste to express itself upon the substance of the order removing the soldiers, but had decided to test its motives and the facts upon which it was based. The Mensheviks had raised a protest. It is not permissible to interfere in the operative orders of the commanding staff. But it was only a month and a half since they had talked the same way about the conspiratorial orders of Kornilov, and they were reminded of this. In order to test the question whether the removal of the troops was dictated by military or political considerations, a competent body was needed. To the extreme surprise of the compromisers, the Bolsheviks accepted the idea of a committee of defense. This committee should be one to gather all data relating to the defense of the capital. That was an important step. Having snatched this dangerous weapon from the hands of the enemy, the Soviet remained in a position to turn the decision about removing the troops this way or that according to circumstances, but in any case against the government and the compromisers. So instead of listening to the bourgeois army or the bourgeois commanders of the military saying that soldiers have to continue to die for this war, this is what the Bolsheviks did. They set up the Committee of Revolutionary Defense. We are here to defend our revolution, not your bourgeois state, not your bourgeois power. We are here to defend the workers, the soldiers, the peasants who have risked their life to try to make a better world possible. Continuing here. The Bolsheviks quite naturally seized upon the Menshevik project of a military committee, for there have been conversations often enough in their own ranks about the necessity of creating in good season an authoritative Soviet committee to lead the coming insurrection. In the military organization of the party, they had even drawn up plans for such a body. The one difficulty they had not yet gotten over was that of reconciling an instrument of insurrection with an elective and openly functioning Soviet, upon whose benches, moreover, sat representatives of the hostile parties. The patriotic proposal of the Mensheviks, therefore, came up most appropriately and came up just in time to assist in the creation of a revolutionary headquarters, a body soon to be renamed Military Revolutionary Committee, and to become the chief lever of the revolution. 2 years after the events described above, the author of this book wrote in an article dedicated to the October Revolution, as soon as the order for the removal of the troops was communicated by headquarters to the executive committee of the Petrograd Soviet, it became clear that this question in its further development would have decisive political significance. The idea of an insurrection began to take form from that moment. It was no longer necessary to invent a Soviet body. The real aim of the future committee was unequivocally brought out when, in the same session, Trotsky concluded his report on the withdrawal of the Bolsheviks from the pre-parliament with the exclamation, Long live the direct and open struggle for a revolutionary power throughout the country. That was a translation into the language of Soviet legality of the slogan, "Long lived the armed insurrection." On the very next day, the 10th, the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks adopted in secret session the resolution of Lenin presenting armed insurrection as the practical task of the coming days. From that moment, the party assumed a clear and imperative fighting formation. The Committee of Defense was included in its plan for a direct struggle for power. See, this is what revolution looks like, and this is something we should all keep in mind. Revolution is not spontaneous. Revolution is not riots in the streets. Revolution is not looting. Revolution is not doing YouTube videos like this. Revolution is highly organized. Revolution is when you have the masses on your side. Revolution is when dictates are put down, committees are put in place, and the vanguard party is ready to lead the agitated, class-conscious working class to their historic destiny. Very, very important, okay? So, shout out to Kamal up in the live stream. He says, "I'm still thinking, comrade." About what? About what? Let me know. What are you thinking about? Are you still thinking about how to cure diseases like the common cold with baking soda and lemon juice? Is that what y'all thinking about? I'm going to keep roasting you, Kamal, until you join one of the call-in shows. Until you join the call-in show, Kamal, I'm going to keep roasting you about being from North Carolina. And we going to really figure out, is North Carolina the Deep South? I say yes. But what do y'all think? What do y'all think? Anyway, continuing here. The government and its allies surrounded the garrison with concentric circles. On the 11th, the commander of the Northern Front, General Cheremissov, reported to the war minister demand of the army committees that the tired out front units be replaced by Petrograd units from the rear. In this instance, headquarters was merely a transmitting mechanism between the compromisers in the army committees and their Petrograd leaders, who were striving to create a broad cover for the plans of Kerensky. The coalition press accompanied this encircling operation with a symphony of patriotic ravings. Daily meetings of the regiments and factories demonstrated, however, that this music of the ruling spheres was not making the slightest impression upon the lower ranks. On the 12th, a mass meeting of the workers of one of the most revolutionary factories of the capital, the old Paravinin, made the following answer to the attack of the bourgeoisie. We declare that we will go into the street when we deem it advisable. We are not afraid of the approaching struggle, and we confidently believe that we will come off victorious. Very, very ironic that the workers are declaring that war is on the government because the government wants the workers to go to war. Very ironic, in a twisted, sick way. In creating a commission to draw up regulations for the Committee of Defense, the Executive Committee of the Petrograd Soviet designated for the future military body. In creating a commission to draw up regulations for the Committee of Defense, the Executive Committee of the Petrograd Soviet designated for the future military body such tasks as the following: to get in touch with the Northern Front and with the headquarters of the Petrograd District, with Central Balt and the Regional Soviet of Finland in order to ascertain the military situation and take the necessary measures, to take a census of the personal composition of the garrison of Petrograd and its environs, also of the ammunition and military supplies, to take measures for the preservation of discipline in the soldier and worker masses. The formula were all-inclusive and at the same time ambiguous. They almost all balanced on a fine line between defense of the capital and armed insurrection. However, these two tasks, heretofore mutually exclusive, were now in actual fact growing into one. Having seized the power, the Soviet would be compelled to undertake the military defense of Petrograd. The element of defense camouflage was not, therefore, violently dragged in, but flowed to some extent from the conditions preceding the insurrection. With this same purpose of camouflage, a social revolutionary and not a Bolshevik was placed at the head of the commission on the Committee of Defense. This was a young and modest intendant, Lazimir, one of those left social revolutionaries who were already traveling with the Bolsheviks before the insurrection. Although, to be sure, not always foreseeing whither the course would lead. Lazimir's preliminary rough draft was edited by Trotsky in two directions. The practical plans relating to the conquest of the garrison were more sharply defined. The general revolutionary goal was still more glossed over. As ratified by the Executive Committee against the protest of two Mensheviks, the draft included in the staff of the Military Revolutionary Committee, the Presidium of the Soviet and of the Soldier Section, representatives of the fleet, of the Regional Committee of Finland, of the railroad unions, of the factory committees, the trade unions, the party military organizations, the Red Guard, etc. The organizational basis was the same as in many other cases, but the personal composition of the committee was determined by its new tasks. It was assumed that the organizations would send representatives familiar with military affairs or standing near to the garrison. The character of an organ should be conditioned by its function. Very interesting. Trotsky is laying out in detail how they formulated, the Revolutionary Committee and what subcommittees were under it, etc., etc. A little bit of deceit at the top to make the government not aware that the Bolsheviks were essentially planning to overthrow the government at this point, after months of them trying to compromise and work with the bourgeois government. What they do to lead the Revolutionary Committee is put a left social revolutionary in front. They basically put up a moderate. They put up not a big scary Bolshevik, but some guy named Lazimir, who probably was before then a reformist, but all of his homies are Bolsheviks. You get what I'm saying? But I will continue here. All right, Kamal in the chat says he's still thinking about the pole and cloves. The question in the horizontal live stream is about Trotsky or Stalin, permanent revolution or socialism in one country first. Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution is heavily dependent upon European, Western, developed nations, picking up the mantle of worker revolution and proletarian dictatorship. And the thing is, what we have seen throughout the 20th century and what we are continuing to see now is that, the banner of socialism or trying to build socialism is usually picked up by the, colonized people of the earth. Not only the people who are economically exploited, but also exploited to some other degree. If you remember, when we first started this book, what is the first argument Trotsky makes about why Bolshevism, communism, socialism was attractive to Russians? It was because Russia was a colony. He explicitly takes something that we have probably never thought about. We never thought about Russia as a colony. But that's the first thing he does. How is this any different than, some guy in Argentina, or some guy in Nigeria, or some woman in Tanzania, or some woman in, India, picking up the banner of socialism? Because not only are they economically oppressed, but they're racially oppressed by their gender, oppressed by many other aspects of their character. And Trotsky does the same thing too. Essentially, Trotsky opens up the history of the Russian Revolution saying, hey guys, we're black too. He essentially opens up the history of the Russian Revolution by saying, hey guys, we're just like the Chinese. Hey guys, we're just like the Costa Ricans. Hey guys, we're just like the Cubans. You know how you meet certain white people and they say, the Irish are just like the blacks. They were treated just as bad. That's essentially what he did too. Me being a Jewish man, we're treated just as bad as indigenous people in America. That's essentially what Trotsky did. That's how he opened up the book. You get what I'm saying? So, very interesting, Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution, because it sort of goes against his own ideas of why people pick up the banner of revolution, of why people want to overthrow, the system that is exploitative in their countries and nations. But I digress. Let's continue here. Another new formation of this period was no less important. Under the direction of the Military Revolutionary Committee, there was created a permanent conference of the garrison. The soldiers section represented the garrison politically, the deputies being elected under party symbols. The garrison conference, however, was to consist of the regimental committees, which guided the daily lives of their units and thus constituted a more immediate, practical guild representation. The analogy between the regimental and the factory committee is obvious. Through the mediation of the workers' section of the Soviet, the Bolsheviks were able upon big political questions to rely confidently upon the workers. Through the mediation of the workers' section of the Soviet, the Bolsheviks were able upon big political questions to rely confidently upon the workers. Okay. But in order to become masters in the factories, it had been necessary to carry the factory and shop committees. The composition of the soldier section guaranteed to the Bolsheviks the political sympathy of the majority of the garrison. But in order to get the practical disposal of the military units, it was necessary to rely directly on the regimental committees. This explains why, in the period preceding the insurrection, the garrison conference naturally crowded out the soldier section and moved to the center of the stage. The more prominent deputies in the section were also, by the way, members of the conference. In an article written not long before these days, "The Crisis is Ripe," Lenin had reproachfully asked, "What has the party done in the matter of ascertaining the attitude of the troops, etc.?" Notwithstanding the devoted work of the military organization, Lenin's reproach was just. A strictly military examination of the forces and materials was difficult for the party to achieve. The habit of mind was lacking and the approach. This situation changed the moment the garrison conference came on the scene. Henceforth, a living panorama of the garrison, not only of the capital, but also of the military ring surrounding it, passed before the eyes of the leaders. On the 12th, the executive committee took up the regulations drafted by Lazimir's commission. In spite of the sessions being secret, the debate was carried on to a certain extent in equivocal language. Here they said one thing and meant another, writes Sukhanov not unjustly. The regulations provided for the establishment under the Committee of Departments of Defense, Supplies, Communications, Intelligence, etc. This was a headquarters or counterquarters. They declared it to be the aim of the conference to raise the fighting capacity of the garrison. That was entirely true, but a fighting capacity may be applied in different ways. The Mensheviks observed with helpless indignation that an idea advanced by them for patriotic purposes was being converted into a screen for the preparation of an insurrection. The camouflage was by no means impenetrable. Everybody understood what the talk was about, but at the same time it could not be broken through. Had not the compromisers themselves behaved in exactly the same way in the past, grouping the garrison around themselves at critical moments and creating sovereign bodies parallel with those of the government. The Bolsheviks were merely following the traditions, so to speak, of the dual power, but they were bringing a new content to these old forms. What had formerly served the purpose of the compromise was now leading to civil war. The Mensheviks demanded that it be placed in the record that they were against the undertaking as a whole. This platonic request was granted. So what Trotsky is laying out here is that beforehand, the Mensheviks, the compromisers, the SRs, the bourgeois remnants after the February Revolution, they were happy to create a dual government. They were happy to have the Bolsheviks share power with them and have sort of competing systems. But then when the Bolsheviks are deciding to arm the workers, to utilize the defected soldiers to defend the revolution, now the Mensheviks and compromisers, the SRs and all the people before, they're very upset about this dual power. And they want it written down that they're against this whole idea. And so now the Bolsheviks will grant their request and say, yeah, we have it written down that you're against, dual power, dual sharing of the power. Continuing here, Trotsky says, on the next day, the question of the Military Revolutionary Committee and the Garrison Conference was taken up by the soldiers section, which only a little while before had constituted the lifeguard of the compromisers. The chief place in this very significant session was rightly occupied by the president of the Central Balt, the sailor Dybenko, a black-bearded giant, a man who never had to look in his pocket for a word. Let's read that again. Who is this new character? The chief place in this very significant session was rightly occupied by the president of the Central Balt, the sailor Dybenko, a black-bearded giant, a man who never had to look in his pocket for a word. The speech of this Helsingfors guest crashed into the stagnant atmosphere of the garrison like a keen and fresh sea wind. Dybenko told about the final break of the fleet with the government and their new attitudes to the command. Before the latest naval operations began, he said, the admiral addressed a question to the Congress of Sailors then sitting. Will they carry out military orders? We answered, we will, under supervision from our side. But if we see that the fleet is threatened with destruction, the commanding staff will be the first to hang from the masthead. To the Petrograd garrison, this was a new language. Even in the fleet, it had come into use only in the last few days. It was the language of insurrection. The little group of Mensheviks grumbled distractedly in a corner. The presidium looked out with some alarm upon that compact mass of gray soldier coats. Not one protesting voice from their ranks. Eyes burned like coals in their excited faces. A spirit of daring was in the air. In conclusion, stimulated by the universal sympathy, Dybenko confidently exclaimed, they talk about the need of bringing out the Petrograd garrison for the defense of the approaches to Petrograd and of Reval in particular. Don't believe a word of it. We will defend Reval ourselves. Stay here and defend the interest of the revolution. When we need your support, we will say so ourselves, and I am confident that you will support us. This challenge, which exactly matched the mood of the soldiers, called out a veritable whirlwind of sincere enthusiasm, in which the protests of a few individual Mensheviks were completely drowned. The question of removing the regiments was settled from that moment. The regulations proposed by Lazimir were adopted by a majority of 283 votes against 1, with 23 abstaining. These figures, unexpected even to the Bolsheviks, gave a measure of the pressure of the revolutionary masses. The vote meant that the soldier section had openly and officially transferred the administration of the garrison from headquarters to the Military Revolutionary Committee. The coming days would show that this was no mere gesture. On that same day, the Executive Committee of the Petrograd Soviet made public the creation, under its supervision, of a special department of the Red Guard. The matter of arming the workers, neglected under the compromisers, and even obstructed by them, had become one of the most important tasks of the Bolshevik Soviet. The suspicious attitude of the soldiers toward the Red Guard was already far in the past. On the contrary, almost all the resolutions of the regiments contained a demand for the arming of the workers. From now on, the Red Guard and the garrison stand side by side. Soon they will still more closely be united by a common submission to the Military Revolutionary Committee. So once again, we as communists, we believe that the workers should be armed. We believe that the workers should remain armed. And what the Bolsheviks did was that they established the Red Guard, which were untrained soldiers who were essentially workers, who then joined the Soviet, the Workers' Council, and they were the defenders of the revolution. And now they have all these soldiers coming in who are joining the Military Revolutionary Committee, which is to defend the revolution, and that's where they're putting the soldiers. And now they're joining them together, okay? This is very important. This is very important, forming a united defense for the revolution. Continuing here. The government was worried. On the morning of the 14th, a conference of the ministers in Kerensky's office ratified the measures undertaken by headquarters against the coming out under preparation. The rulers were guessing, will it stop this time at an armed demonstration, or will it go to the point of insurrection? The commander of the district said to the representatives of the press, in any case, we are ready. Those doomed to death not infrequently experience an afflux of life force just before the end. Those doomed to death not infrequently experience an afflux of life force just before the end. So you feel, it's like what Jadakiss said, you know he deserved it because he died with his eyes open. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, before you die, that's when you feel the most life. When you're seeing the light at the end of the road, that's when you decide, man, you know what I should do? I should go skydiving. All right, anyway, I'm sorry, I was being silly. Continuing. At a joint session of the executive committees, Dan, imitating the June intonations of Tsetserelli, who had now taken refuge in the Caucasus, demanded of the Bolsheviks an answer to the question, do they intend to come out? And if they do, when? From the answer of Ryazanov, the Menshevik Bogdanov drew the not unjustified conclusion that the Bolsheviks were preparing an insurrection and would stand at the head of it. The Menshevik paper wrote, and the Bolsheviks are evidently relying in their plans for a coming seizure of power on the garrison staying here. But in this remark, the phrase seizure of power was in quotation marks. The compromisers still not seriously believe in the danger. They did not fear the victory of the Bolsheviks so much as the triumph of the counter-revolution in consequence of new civil war conflicts. Having undertaken to arm the workers, the Soviet had to find its way to the weapons. This did not happen all at once. Here, too, each practical step forward was suggested by the masses. It was only necessary to listen attentively to their suggestions. 4 years after the event, Trotsky, in an evening devoted to recollections of the October Revolution, told the following story. When a delegation from the workers came to me and said they needed weapons, I answered, but the arsenals, you see, are not in our hands. They answered, we have been to the Sechtaresk arms factory. Well, and what about it? They said that if the Soviets ordered, they would deliver. I gave an order for 5,000 rifles, and they got them the same day. That was a first experiment. God damn! Once again, for any leftists out there who think that we should be going to the gun stores and buying AR-15s and M16s, whatever, buying pistols, we don't have to do that. If we propagandize to the workers, if we actually show the workers we are on their side, if we agitate for a real revolution, the guns will fall in our hands. Literally, Trotsky has laid out multiple times when the workers were penniless, they were armless, and what happened? A fucking warship landed in their fucking palms. Okay, this is inspirational. What Trotsky just said here is that the workers were on their side so much that the workers went to the arms factory where they fucking make the guns. And Trotsky just said, can we get 5,000 of them? And 5,000 of them bitches landed in his palms, man. Does that not fucking inspire you, bruh? Does this not inspire you? Does this not fucking tell you that it is absolutely possible? Bruh, come on now. Come on now. That shit gave me a chill down my spine. Trotsky said we ordered 5,000 of them things and they fucking landed. Shit. God damn. Anyway, I'll continue here. The hostile press immediately raised a cry against this delivery of weapons by a government factory upon the order of a person indicted for state treason and only released from prison on bail. And Trotsky was out on fucking bail, bro. Oh my God. Is that not the most gangster shit you heard? This nigga said, hey, bro, hey, 75,000 of them joints, and he's out on fucking bail and wanted by the government, man. Ain't that some revolutionary shit? Don't that shit get you turned up, man? Come on now. Anyway, the government kept still, but the highest organ of the democracy came forward with a strict command. Weapons were to be given to nobody without its strict permission, the permission of the Central Executive Committee of the Soviets. It might seem that on the question of delivering weapons, Dan and Gotz were as little in a position to forbid as Trotsky to permit or give orders. The factories and arsenals were supposed to be under government administration, but ignoring the official authorities at all serious moments had become a tradition with the Central Executive Committee and had permanently entered into the customs of the government itself, corresponding as it did to the nature of things. The violation of tradition and custom came, however, from another direction. Having ceased to distinguish the thunderings of the Central Executive Committee from the lightnings of Kerensky, the workers and soldiers ignored them both. See, once again, inherently, we know as communists, as socialists, that the power is in the people. When we say all power to the people, we know that the people are already the power. We turn the lights on in this bitch. We keep the water flowing from the toilets. You get what I'm saying? We're the ones who cook your food, who fight in your wars, who raise your children. The workers are the backbone of society. And so if the workers say, we want to give guns to these radical communists, guns will come to the radical communists. We don't have to buy shit. We don't have to support, companies like, Smith & Wesson or, what are the other companies that make guns? I don't even know. You get what I'm saying? We don't have to go into the shops and support them with our money because we could get the workers to just drop them bitches off at our front door if we agitate correctly. Very important. Very, very important. And the workers will ignore their bosses. The workers will ignore the politicians if the workers trust the party. Something to think about here. Something to really fucking think about. Come on now. And this is for anybody out here. This is something for anybody out here who's going to try to, Fed jacket me. Number one, the feds don't send niggas to do their dirty work, at least in this capacity. If the feds were really, funding a young nigga like me, I wouldn't be stuck out here in Budapest with $2 and negative balances in my other accounts. Okay? That would not be my situation right now. But I want everybody to know that I'm not out here trying to advocate for y'all to, blow up military installations. I'm not out here advocating for you to assassinate politicians. I'm not telling anybody to commit any violence. All I'm telling the, radical people who are tuned in, whether they're vocal or not on my channel, is to propagandize, to organize, to get in contact with other people that are as radical as you, to get in organizations that you believe are actually revolutionary, advocate for revolution, the overthrow of capitalism, American empire, white supremacy, and fight against fascism, etc. I'm not telling y'all to do anything violent, because once again, violent revolution is the inevitability of our conflict with capitalism. We know that for a fact. But the way we will defend the revolution, the way we will combat the forces of reaction and fascism will come from the workers landing the warships in our palms. And I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds impossible to think that we could have a nuclear submarine painted red, but we could absolutely fucking do it. We could paint the White House black without even lifting a gun. If the propaganda is right, man, you gotta believe. Like Jeezy said, you gotta believe. Okay, I digress. Anyway, it was more convenient to demand the transfer of the Petrograd regiments in the name of the front than in the name of the chancelleries at the rear. For these reasons, Kerensky placed the Petrograd garrison under the commander-in-chief of the Northern Front, Cheremissov, while excluding the capital in its military aspect from its own administration as the head of the government. Kerensky took comfort in the thought that he would subject it to himself as commander-in-chief of the army. In his turn, General Cheremissov, who was going to be a very hard nut to crack, sought help from the commissars and committeemen. With their common labors, a plan of future activities was drawn up. On the 7th, the headquarters at the front, together with the army organizations, was to summon representatives of the Petrograd Soviet to Pskov in the presence of the trenches to present them with a brusque demand. There was nothing for the Petrograd Soviet to do but accept the challenge. The delegation of a score or so appointed at the sessions of the 16th, about half members of the Soviet and half representatives of the regiments, was headed by the president of the workers' section, Fyodorov, and leaders of the soldier section and the military organization of the Bolsheviks, Lashevich, Sadovsky, Menkonoshin, Dashikovich, and others. A few left social revolutionaries and Menshevik internationalists included in the delegation promised to defend the policy of the Soviet. At a conference of the delegates held before their departure, the draft of a declaration proposed by Sverdlov was adopted. The same session of the Soviet took up the regulations of the Military Revolutionary Committee. This institution had barely come into existence when it assumed in the eyes of the enemy an aspect growing every day more hateful. The Bolsheviks make no answer, cried an orator of the opposition, to the direct question, are they preparing an attack? Are they preparing an attack? This is either cowardice or lack of confidence in their forces. The meeting greeted this remark with hearty laughter. The representative of the government party was demanding that the party of insurrection open the secrets of its heart to him. The new committee, continued the orator, is nothing else but a revolutionary headquarters for the seizure of power. They, the Mensheviks, would not enter it. How many are there of you? Cried a voice from the benches. There were indeed only a few Mensheviks in the Soviet, 50 altogether, but nevertheless it seemed authoritatively known to them that the masses are not in favor of coming out. In his reply, Trotsky did not deny that the Bolsheviks were preparing for a seizure of power. We make no secret of that, but at present, he said, that is not the question. The government has demanded the removal of the revolutionary troops from Petrograd, and to that we have to answer yes or no. The regulations drafted by Lazimir were adopted by an overwhelming majority. The president proposed to the Military Revolutionary Committee to begin work on the following day. Thus, one more forward step was taken. So what Trotsky is saying here is that, the bourgeois are very upset that the Bolsheviks are trying to seize power. They know it. But the Bolsheviks are playing the political game. They're doing political speak. You know, the bourgeois ask them, are you trying to seize power? Are you going to take over the government? And, the Bolsheviks reply, I mean, we don't hide any secret of that. But that's not the question right now. That's not what we're talking about here. We're here to talk about, I don't know, taxes and water pumps in the city. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, very interesting. I do think it's important for us to play it political at times. You don't have to telegraph your every move. But just like in real politics, when Donald Trump says, for example, these low IQ individuals, we know he's doing a racist attack against black people, for example. So this is what's called dog whistling, at least in American political lexicon. By dog whistling, you're able to communicate to your base, but also have plausible deniability against your opposition. Going here. The commander of the district, Paul Konnikov, had that day once more reported to the government that an action was under preparation by the Bolsheviks. The report was couched in bold language. The garrison as a whole is on the side of the government. The officers' schools have received an order to be ready. In an appeal to the population, Paul Konnikov promised, in case of necessity, to adopt the most extreme measures. The burgomaster, Schreider, a social revolutionary, added a prayer on his part that no disorder shall be instigated so that we may avoid actual famine in the capital. Threatening and adjuring, making bold and making timid, the press meanwhile was rising to a higher and higher note. To impress the imagination of delegates from the Petrograd Soviet, a military theatrical setting was arranged for the reception in Pskov. In the office of headquarters around tables, covered with imposing maps, stood notable generals, high commissars with Voitinsky at their head, and representatives of the army committees. The chiefs of the departments read reports of the military situation on land and sea. All the reports came to one and the same conclusion. It is necessary to call out the Petrograd garrison immediately for the defense of the approaches of the capital. The commissars and committeemen indignantly refuted all suspicions in regard to hidden political motives. The whole operation, they declared, has been dictated by strategic necessity. The delegates had no direct proof to the contrary. In this kind of business, evidence does not grow on a bush. But the whole situation was a refutation. The front had no lack of men. What it lacked was willingness to fight. The mood of the Petrograd garrison was by no means such as to reinforce a front so shaken. Moreover, the lessons of the Kornilov days were still in the memories of all. Thoroughly convinced of their correctness, the delegation easily resisted the assault of headquarters and returned to Petrograd more unanimous than when they had left. Those direct proofs, which the participants at that time lacked, are now at the disposal of the historian. The secret military correspondence proves that it was not the front that had demanded the Petrograd regiments, but that Kerensky had imposed them upon the front. To a telegram from his war minister, the commander-in-chief of the Northern Front answered on the direct wire, Secret 17X. The initiative for sending the troops of the Petrograd garrison to the front was yours and not mine. When it became clear that the troops of the Petrograd garrison did not want to go to the front, that is, that they are not capable of fighting, I then, in a private conversation with your officer representative, said that we have already plenty of such troops at the front, but in view of the desire expressed by you to send them to the front, I did not refuse them, and I do not refuse them now. If you, as before, consider their transfer from Petrograd necessary. The semi-bellicose tone of this telegram is explained by the fact that Chermissov, a general with a taste for high politics, having been considered red while in the Tsar's army, and having afterward become, according to Milikov's expression, the favorite of the revolutionary democracy, had evidently come to the conclusion that it would be better to draw apart in good season from the government and its conflict with the Bolsheviks. The conduct of Chermissov during the days of the revolution wholly confirms this assumption. So if I understand right, once the Bolsheviks come in power, they get the secret documents that the government was hiding. That's how we find out about Sykes-Picot, that Western European nations essentially divided up the Middle East on arbitrary lines just for their own economic and political benefit. What I am assuming here from reading this is that this guy Chermisov was working behind scenes with the government, even though he was considered a red, meaning a communist or a radical at the time. He was secretly working behind the scenes to try to send the Petrograd workers, soldiers, to the front lines, even though it was unnecessary. Sort of being a type of Benedict Arnold. That's what I'm getting here. All right, continuing here. The struggle about the garrison interwove with the struggle about the Congress of Soviets. Only 4 or 5 days remained before the date originally designated. The coming out was expected in connection with the Congress. It was assumed that, as in the July days, the movement would develop in the way of an armed mass demonstration with street fighting. The right Menshevik Postrov, obviously relying upon data supplied by the intelligence service or by the French war mission, always bold in the manufacture of forged documents, expounded in the bourgeois press the plan of a Bolshevik action that was to take place on the night of October 17th. The ingenious authors of the plan did not forget to foretell that at one of the gates of the city the Bolsheviks were to pick up the dark elements. The soldiers of the guard regiments were as good at laughing as the gods of Homer. The white pillars and chandeliers of Smolny shook with uproarious volleys when Potrasov's article was read at a meeting of the Soviet. The white pillars and chandeliers of Smolny shook with uproarious volleys when Potrasov's article was read at a meeting of the Soviet. But the all-wise government, unable as ever to see what was taking place before its eyes, took serious fright at this awkward forgery, and hastily assembled at 2 o'clock in the morning in order to hold off these dark elements. After renewed conferences between Kerensky and the military authorities, the necessary measures were taken. The guards of the Winter Palace and the State Bank were reinforced. 2 training schools were called in from Oranienbaum, and even an armored train from the Romanian front. At the last moment, writes Milikov, the Bolsheviks revoked their preparations. Why they did this is not clear. Even several years after the event, the learned historian still prefers to believe an invention that contained its own refutation. The authorities directed the militia to investigate the environs of the city to see if they could find signs of any preparation for a coming out. The reports of the militia were a combination of live observations with police stupidity. In the Alexandro Nevsky section, which contains a number of big factories, the investigators found complete maneuvers. In the Vyborg district, the necessity of overthrowing the government was being openly preached, but externally all was quiet. In the Vasilik Ostrov district, the mood was high, but here too external signs of an action were not to be observed. On the Narva side, a redoubled agitation in favor of action was going on, but it was impossible to get an answer from anybody to the question, just when. Either the day and hour were being kept strictly secret, or they were really unknown to anybody. Decision to reinforce the patrols in the suburbs and have the commissars of the militia inspect the sentry post more frequently. Certain correspondence in the Moscow liberal press is not a bad supplement to the reports of the militia. In the suburbs, at the Petersburg factories, Nevsky, Abukovsky, and Putilov, Bolshevik agitation in favor of a coming out is in progress everywhere. The workers are in a state of start moving. The workers are in a state to start moving at any moment. During recent days, there has been observed in Petrograd an unheard of influx of deserters. At the Warsaw station, you can't get through because the soldiers, with their suspicious looks, their burning eyes, and excited faces. There is information of the presence in Petrograd of whole gangs of thieves who have caught the smell of their prey. The dark forces are being organized, and the dens and lunchrooms are brimful of them. Philistine fright and police rumor here interweave with certain amount of austere fact. In approaching its climax, the revolutionary cries stirred up the social deeps to the very bottom. Deserters and robber gangs and dens of iniquity did actually all rise at the rumble of the approaching earthquake. The leaders of society gazed with physical horror at the unleashed forces of their own regime, at its ulcers and vices. The revolution had not created but only uncovered them. at the headquarters of a corps in Dvinsk in those days. Baron Budberg, a man already known to us, a bilious reactionary, but not wanting a gift of observation and his own kind of penetration, wrote, "The cadets, the cadetoids, the Octoberist, and the many-colored revolutionists of the ancient and of the March formation feel their end approaching and chirp and chatter on all sides, reminding one of the Muslim who tried to stop an eclipse of the moon with a rattle." The garrison conference was first called together on the 18th. The telephonogram sent to the military units told them to refrain from action on their own initiative and fulfill only those orders of headquarters that should be countersigned by the soldier sections. In this, the Soviet was making a decisive and open attempt to take control of the garrison. The telephonogram was in essence nothing else than a summons to overthrow the existing authorities, but it could be interpreted, if one wished, as a peaceful act of replacing the compromisers with Bolsheviks in the mechanic of the dual power. Practically, this came to the same thing, but the more flexible interpretation left room for illusions. The Presidium of the Central Executive Committee, considering itself the master of Smolny, made an attempt to stop the dispatch of the telephonogram. It only compromised itself once more. The assembly of representatives of the regimental and company committees of Petrograd and the environs occurred at the designated hour and turned out to be extraordinarily large. Thanks to the atmosphere created by the enemy, the reports of the participants in this garrison conference automatically concentrated upon the question of the prospective coming out. There occurred a significant muster roll, upon which the leaders would scarcely have ventured upon their own initiative. Those against the action were the military school in Peterhof and the 9th Cavalry Regiment. The squadrons of the cavalry of the Guard were inclined to neutrality. The military school in Oranienbaum would submit only to the commands of the Central Executive Committee. That exhausted the hostile or neutral voices. Those declaring their readiness to come out at a word from the Petrograd Soviet were the following: the Urgetsky, the Moscow, the Voronezhsky, the Pavlovsky, the Kekgomsky, the Semenovskys, the Ismailovsky, the 1st Sharpshooters in the 3rd Reserve Regiments, the 2nd Baltic Crew, the Electro-Technical Battalion, and the Artillery Division of the Guard. The Grenadier Regiment would come out only at the summons of the Congress of Soviets. That was enough. The less important units followed the lead of the majority. The representatives of the Central Executive Committee, who had not long ago justly considered the Petrograd garrison the source of their power, were now almost unanimously denied the floor. In a state of impotent exasperation, they left the unauthorized assembly, which immediately thereafter, at the suggestion of the president, declared, "No orders are valid without the countersign of the Soviet." So once again, a very powerful image Trotsky is laying out here. These multiple garrisons. And a lot of us don't understand how the military works, how it's divided into regiments, garrisons, battalions, etc., etc. But, eventually it comes down to this. It's a group of mostly men, though there are some militaries that are, gender diverse. It comes down to a group of men deciding who are they going to listen to. And essentially what Trotsky is laying out here is that these soldiers who probably swore an oath to defend Mother Russia, the Tsar, the bourgeois committee of the Central Executive, whatever, they decided that they're going to betray that oath and decide to follow the Bolsheviks because they believe that is in their best interest and the interest of their people, their families, themselves. Very, very powerful. Imagine if the same thing happened in America. I believe that it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible to get National Guard regiments, the Coast Guard, even whole abroad military units to say that we no longer listen to the, president. We listen now only to the revolutionary, vanguard party of America, the Communist Party. Continuing here. So, that which had been preparing in the minds of the garrison during the last months, and especially weeks, was now crystallizing. The government turned out to be more insignificant than it had been possible to think. While the town was buzzing with rumors of a coming out and of bloody battles, the conference of regimental committees, showing an overwhelming predominance of Bolsheviks, made both demonstrations and mass battles essentially unnecessary. The garrison was confidently advancing to the revolution, seeing it not as an insurrection but as a realization of the irrefutable right of the Soviet to decide the fate of the country. This movement had incomparable power, but at the same time, a certain heaviness. The party was obliged to attune its activity with some skill to the political stride of the regiments, a majority of whom were awaiting a summons from the Petrograd Soviet, but some from the Congress of Soviets. Once again, let's just stop right here and be amazed that we are on page 912. I'm sorry. What Trotsky is saying is amazing, of course. But goddamn, can you believe it? We are on page 912 in this book. I did not think this was possible, low-key. I am so glad and blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have life, to be able to read this book and share it with you. I am just impressed that we got this momentous task done. Hopefully somebody out there appreciates it. I know there's people out there that appreciate. Y'all tune in all the time. But god damn, this is a lot of work. Page 912, volume 3 of Leon Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution. We made it. We made it. Pop champagne. Oh. In order to ward off the danger of even a temporary interference with the development of the offensive, it was necessary to answer one question that was disturbing not only enemies but friends. Will not an insurrection spontaneously break out almost any day? In the tramways, on the streets, in the stores, there was no talk but of an expected coming out. On the palace square, in front of the Winter Palace and the General Staff, long queues of officers were offering the government their services and receiving revolvers in exchange. In the hours of danger, neither the revolvers nor their owners will put in 1 second's appearance. The leading editorials in all the current papers were devoted to the question of the insurrection. Gorky demanded of the Bolsheviks that unless they were the helpless playthings of the enraged multitude, they should refute these rumors. This alarm of uncertainty penetrated even the workers' sections, and still more the regiments. To them, too, it began to seem as though a coming out were being prepared without them. This is one of the problems of reading this book, in the 21st century. When he keeps on saying coming out, what he means is a violent revolution. But it sounds like, there's going to be like drag queens in the street. Because as people imagine the left now, it's just all cultural leftism. But what he's talking about is like the government is afraid of the coming out of the workers. Not that the workers are going to sashay down the runway and fuck it up, like RuPaul said. But that the workers are actually going to, put them things to use. You know what I'm saying? But I digress. Coming out. Anyway, this alarm of uncertainty penetrated even the workers' sections and still more the regiments. To them, too, it began to seem as though a coming out were being prepared without them. And by whom? Why was Smolny silent? The self-contradictory situation of the Soviet as a public parliament and at the same time a revolutionary headquarters created great difficulties in those last moments. It became impossible to remain longer silent. During the last days, declared Trotsky at the end of an evening session of the Soviet, the press has been full of communications, rumors, articles about an impending action. The decisions of the Petrograd Soviet are published and made known to everybody. The Soviet is an elective institution and cannot have a decision that would not be known to the workers and soldiers. I declare in the name of the Soviet that no armed actions have been settled upon by us. But if the Soviet in the course of events should be obliged to set the date for a coming out, the workers and soldiers will come out to the last man at its summons. They say that I signed an order for 5,000 rifles. Yes, I signed it. The Soviets will continue to organize and arm the workers' guard. The delegates understood the battle was near, but without them and over their heads, the signal would not be given. However, besides a reassuring explanation, the masses had to have a clear revolutionary perspective. For this purpose, the speaker united the two questions, removal of the garrison and coming Congress of Soviets. We are in conflict with the government upon a question that may become extremely sharp. We will not permit them to strip Petrograd of its revolutionary garrison. This conflict is in its turn subordinate to another that approaches. It is known that the bourgeoisie, that the Petrograd Soviet is going to propose to the Congress of Soviets that they seize the power. And foreseeing an inevitable battle, the bourgeois classes are trying to disarm Petrograd. The political setup of the revolution was first given in this speech with complete definition. We expect to seize the power. We need the garrison, and we will not give it up. At the first attempt of the counter-revolution to break up the Congress, we will answer with a counterattack, which will be ruthless, and which we will carry through to the end. Here, too, the announcement of a decisive political offensive was made under the formula of military defense. Sukhanov, who turned up at the meeting with a hopeless plan to draw the Soviet into a celebration of Gorky's 50th anniversary, subsequently made an apt comment on the revolutionary knot that was tied there. For Smolny, he said, the question of the garrison is a question of insurrection. For the soldier, it is a question of their own fate. It would be difficult to imagine a more fortunate starting point for the policy of those days. This did not prevent Sukhanov from considering the policy of the Bolsheviks as a whole as ruinous. Along with Gorky and thousands of radical intellectuals, he feared above all things that so-called enraged multitude, which was with admirable deliberation developing its offensive from day to day. The Soviet was sufficiently powerful to announce openly its program of state revolution and even set the date. At the same time, right up to the date set by itself for the complete victory, the Soviet was powerless in thousands of great and small questions. Kerensky, politically already reduced to a zero, was still giving out decrees in the Winter Palace. Lenin, the inspirer of this incomparable movement of the masses, was hiding underground, and the Minister of Justice, Maliatovich, had renewed in those days his instructions to the district attorney to bring about Lenin's arrest. Even in Smolny, on its own territory, the all-powerful Petrograd Soviet seemed to be living only by grace of the authorities. The administration of the building, of the cash box, of the dispatching room, the automobiles, the telephones, all was still in the hands of the Central Executive Committee, which itself only hung by the mere thread of an abstract right of secession. Sukhanov tells how, after the meeting, he came out in the thick of night on Smolny Square in black darkness with rain coming down in the streets. The whole crowd of delegates were hopelessly milling around a couple of smoking and stinking automobiles that had been assigned to the Bolshevik Soviet from the opulent garages of the Central Executive Committee. The President Trotsky was also about to approach the automobile, relates this omnipotent observer, but after stopping and looking on for a minute, he chuckled and, splashing through the puddles, disappeared in the darkness. On the platform of the tram car, Sukhanov ran into some unknown small-sized fellow of modest appearance with a black goatee. The unknown tried to console Sukhanov in all the discomforts of the long journey. "Who is that?" asked Sukhanov of his Bolshevik companion. "An old party worker, Sverdlov. In less than 2 weeks, this small man with a little black goatee will be president of the Central Executive Committee, the supreme governing power of the Soviet Republic." It may be that Sverdlov consoled his traveling companion out of a feeling of gratitude. 8 days before that, in the apartment of Sukhanov, to be sure, without his knowledge, had occurred that meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee that placed the armed insurrection on the order of the day. Very interesting, kind of a funny story Trotsky is laying out here, how he was just watching these people who used to be so powerful from afar, who don't even recognize him, and yet, with hindsight at his disposal, he's able to look at the irony that these powerful people didn't recognize him, and in about 2 weeks, Trotsky is going to be one of the most powerful people in the largest country in the world. Very interesting how he lays out that story of the tram car right here. Anyway, continuing on, the next morning, the Central Executive Committee made an attempt to turn back the wheel of events. The Presidium convoked a lawful assembly of the garrison, drawing into it also those backward committees which should long ago have been re-elected, and which had not been present the days before. The supplementary test of the garrison, while also giving something new, still more clearly confirmed yesterday's picture. This time, those opposed to the coming outs were a majority of the committees of the troops quartered in the Peter and Paul Fortress, and the committees of the Armored Car Division. They both announced their submission to the Central Executive Committee. This information was not to be ignored. Situation on an island washed by the Neva and its canal between the center of the city and two outlying districts, this fortress dominates the nearby bridges and protects, or if you will, lays bare, from the side of the river, the approaches to the Winter Palace, where the government had its seat. Although deprived of military significance in large-scale operations, the fortress can speak a weighty word in a street fight. Moreover, and this perhaps is most important, the well-stocked Konversky arsenal adjoins the fortress. The workers were in need of rifles, yes, and the more revolutionary regiments, too, were almost disarmed. The importance of the armored cars in a street battle needs no explanation. On the side of the government, they might cause many fruitless sacrifices. On the side of the insurrection, they would shorten the road to victory. In the approaching days, the Bolsheviks would have to give special attention to the fortress and the armored car division. For the rest, the correlation of forces at this new conference turned out to be the same as on the preceding day. The attempt of the Central Executive Committee to carry its own very cautious resolution was coldly repulsed by an overwhelming majority. Not having been summoned by the Petrograd Soviet, it was noted the conference does not consider itself empowered to adopt decisions. The compromise leaders had themselves begged for the supplementary slap in the face. Finding the approach to the regiments barricaded below, the Central Executive Committee tried to get hold of the garrison from above. By agreement with the staff, they appointed Captain Malevsky, a social revolutionary, chief commissar for the whole district, and announced their willingness to recognize the commissars of the Soviet on condition that they submit to the chief commissar. This attempt to get astride of the Bolshevik garrison through the instrumentality of a captain unknown to anybody was obviously hopeless. Having rejected it, the Soviet broke off the negotiations. The insurrection laid bare by Petrograd had not occurred. The enemy now confidently named another date, the 20th of October. On that day, as we know, the Congress of Soviets was originally to have opened, and the insurrection followed that Congress like its own shadow. To be sure, the Congress had already postponed its opening 5 days. Never mind, the object had moved, but the shadow remained. This time, too, all necessary measures were taken by the government to prevent a coming out. Reinforced sentry guards were placed in the suburbs. Cossack patrols rode through the workers' district all night long. Cavalry reserves were concealed at various points throughout the city. The militia was made ready for action, and half of its members did continual duty in the commissariats. Armored cars, light artillery, and machine guns were set up near the Winter Palace. The approaches to Winter Palace were guarded by patrols. Once more, the insurrection that no one was preparing and for which no one had issued a call did not take place. The day went by more peacefully than many others. Work in the shops and factories never ceased. Izvestia, edited by Dan, crowned about the victory over the Bolsheviks. Their adventuring with armored demonstrations in Petrograd is about over. The Bolsheviks have been crushed by the mere indignation of the united democracy. They are already surrendering. One might literally think that the enemy had lost their heads and were deliberately trying with untimely frights and still less timely trumpetings of victory to lead public opinion astray and conceal the actual plans of the Bolsheviks. The decision to create a military revolutionary committee, first introduced on the 9th, was passed at a plenary session of the Soviet only a week later. The Soviet is not a party. Its machinery is heavy. 4 days more were required to form the committee. Those 10 days, however, did not go for nothing. The conquest of the garrison was in full swing. The conference of regimental committees had demonstrated its viability. The arming of the workers was going forward, and thus the Military Revolutionary Committee, although it went to work only on the 20th, 5 days before the insurrection, found ready to its hands a sufficiently well-organized dominion. Being boycotted by the compromisers, the staff of the committee contained only Bolsheviks and left social revolutionaries. That eased and simplified the task. Of the social revolutionaries, only Lazimir did any work, and he was even placed at the head of the bureau in order to emphasize the fact that the committee was a Soviet and not a party institution. In essence, however, the committee, whose president was Trotsky and its chief workers Podolsky and Antonov Ovsenko, Lashevich, Sadovsky, and Mekhonoshikin, relied exclusively upon Bolsheviks. The committee hardly met once in plenary session with delegates present from all the institutions listed in its regulations. The work was carried on through the Bureau under the guidance of the President, with Sverdlov brought in upon all important matters, and that was the general staff of the insurrection. The bulletin of the committee thus modestly registers its first step. Commissars were appointed in the combatant units of the garrison and in certain institutions and storehouses for observation and leadership. This meant that, having won the garrison politically, the Soviet was now getting organizational control of it. The dominant role in selecting these commissars was played by the military organization of the Bolsheviks. Among its Petrograd members, approximately 1,000, there was no small number of resolute soldiers and young officers utterly devoted to the revolution, and who had since the July days been tempered in the prisons of Kerensky. The commissars recruited from its midst found in the troops of the garrison a soil well prepared. The garrison considered them its own and submitted to their orders with complete willingness. The initiative in getting possession of institutions came in most cases from below. The workers and clerical employees of the arsenal adjoining the Peter and Paul fortress themselves raised the question of the necessity of establishing control over the giving out of arms. A commissar sent there succeeded in stopping a supplemental arming of the Junkers, held back 10,000 rifles on their way to the Don region, and smaller assignments to a number of suspicious organizations and persons. This control was soon extended to other arsenals and even to private dealers in weapons. It was only necessary to appeal to the committee of soldiers, workers, or clerical employees of the given institution or store, and the resistance of the administration would be immediately broken. Weapons were given out henceforth only upon the order of the commissars. So once again, for all the leftists out there who believe in the Second Amendment, the right of the people to bear arms, the Soviets, the communists that we admire, that a lot of white leftists admire. Once again, I don't hold the Soviets up so high. I'm critical of them when it's necessary, but I digress. The Soviets did not believe that everybody should just be given guns. It's a right to have guns. No. The workers, the soldiers, the defenders of the revolution have a right to have arms. To defend the working class revolution, to defend the dictatorship of the proletariat, yes, the workers have to be armed. But no, that does not mean that everybody just gets a gun like Oprah. You get a gun, and you get a gun, and you get a gun. No, that is not the case, okay? Let's make that absolutely clear. All right, continuing here. The typographical workers, through their union, called the attention of the committee to an increase of Black Hundred leaflets and brochures. It was decided that in all suspicious cases, the printers' union should come for instructions to the Military Revolutionary Committee. This control through the typographical workers was the most effective of all possible forms of control over the printed agitation of the counter-revolution. And once again, freedom of speech does not mean the freedom to speak against the workers' revolution. We will not have any fascist literature just popping up here. So what did the Soviets do? Once again, the workers came to the Bolsheviks. They came to the Soviets and said, hey, we just got an order to print up 1,000 pieces saying that women belong in the kitchen, men belong on the front lines. Should we print this? We really don't want to. And the Soviets said, you don't have to print a goddamn thing if you don't want to. So yes, very important for us to remember that the things that people hold as sacrosanct in America, particularly in the Western mind, the right to freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, human rights in general, these are bourgeois ideas. These are bourgeois ideas that, once again, are not even fully implemented under bourgeois dictatorships like we live under in the United States. There are many people who do not have the right to bear arms. There are many people who do not have the right to freedom of expression, as we know through the multiple political prisoners, particularly in my home state of Louisiana, in Angola, Louisiana. But I digress. I'm going down a rabbit hole right here. That's the point. So yeah, we don't, hold up these bourgeois ideas to be, sacrosanct and holy and untouchable. Okay, that's something that we need to take in mind. Anyway. Not satisfied with this formal denial of the rumor of an insurrection, the Soviet openly designated Sunday the 22nd as the day for a peaceful review of its forces. Not, however, in the form of street processions, but of meetings in the factories, barracks, and all the major institutions of Petrograd. With the obvious aim of provoking bloody interference, some mysterious worshippers set the same day for a church procession through the streets of the capital. Their summons, issued in the name of some unknown Cossacks, invited the citizens to take part in a religious procession in memory of the delivery of Moscow from the enemy in 1812. This historical pretext was none too genuine, but over and above, this is the organization's proposed to the Almighty to hand down a blessing upon the Cossack arms, standing guard against the enemies of the Russian land, a proposal that clearly related to the year 1917. There was no reason to fear a serious counter-revolutionary manifestation. The clergy had no power among the Petrograd masses. They could raise up against the Soviet under church banners only pitiful remnants of the Black Hundred gangs. But with the cooperation of the experienced provocateurs of the intelligence service and of Cossack officers, bloody encounters were not impossible. As a measure of prevention, the Military Revolutionary Committee undertook in the first place to strengthen its influence upon the Cossack regiments. A stricter regime was also introduced in the building occupied by the revolutionary staff. It was no longer easy to get into Smolny, writes John Reed. The pass system was changed every few hours, for spies continually sneaked through. At a meeting of the Garrison Conference on the 21st devoted to a discussion of the Soviet day to follow, the spokesman proposed a series of measures for the prevention of possible street clashes. The 4th Cossack Regiment, which stood farthest to the left, announced through its delegates that it would not take part in the religious procession. The 14th Cossack Regiment announced that it would struggle with all its power against the attempts of the counter-revolution, but at the same time that it considered a coming out for the seizure of power untimely. Of the 3 Cossack regiments, only one was absent, the Uralsky, the most backward regiment, one brought into Petrograd in July for the crushing of the Bolsheviks. Upon the proposal of Trotsky, the conference adopted 3 short resolutions. Number 1, the garrison of Petrograd and its environs promises the Military Revolutionary Committee full support in all its steps. Number 2, the October 22nd is to be a day devoted to a peaceful review of forces. The garrison appeals to the Cossacks. We invite you to our meeting tomorrow. You are welcome, brother Cossacks. Number 3, the All-Russian Congress of Soviets must take the power in its hands and guarantee to the people peace, land, and bread. The garrison solemnly promises to place all its forces at the disposal of the Congress of Soviets. Rely upon us, authorized representatives of the soldiers, workers, and peasants. We are all at our post, ready to conquer or die. Hundreds of hands were raised for this resolution, which sealed the program of the insurrection. 57 men abstained. These were the neutrals, that is, the wavering enemy. Not one hand was raised against the resolution. The noose around the neck of the February regime was being drawn in a reliable knot. In the course of the day, it became known that the mysterious instigators of the religious procession had given up their demonstration at the suggestion of the commander-in-chief of the district. This serious moral success, an excellent measure of the social pressure of the garrison conference, permitted a confident prediction that on the following day the enemy, generally speaking, would not venture to poke their heads into the street. The Military Revolutionary Committee appointed 3 commissars to the district headquarters: Sadovsky, Menkoshin, and Lazimir. Orders of the commander were to become effective only when countersigned by one of these 3. At a telephone call from Smolny, the staff sent an automobile for the delegation. The customs of the dual power were still in effect, but contrary to the expectations, this extreme politeness of the staff did not imply a readiness to make concessions. After listening to the declaration of Sadovsky, Polkovnikov stated that he did not recognize any commissars and had no need of any guardianship. 2, a hint from the delegation that along that road headquarters might meet with resistance from the side of the troops. Polkovnikov dryly answered that the garrison was in his hands and his submission was assured. His assurance was sincere, writes Mekhonoshin in his memoirs. We felt no affectation in it. For the return trip to Smolny, the delegates did not receive an official automobile. A special session of the conference to which Trotsky and Sverdlov were summoned adopted a decision to consider the break with headquarters an accomplished fact and make it the starting points for a further offensive. The first conditions of success, the districts must be kept in touch with all stages and episodes of the struggle. The enemy must not be allowed to catch the masses unaware. Through the district Soviets and committees of the party, the information was sent into all parts of the town. The regiments were immediately informed of what had happened. The instructions were confirmed. Carry out only those orders that are countersigned by the commissars. It was also suggested that they send out only the most reliable soldiers for patrol duty. But headquarters also decided to take measures, spurred on evidently by his compromisist allies. Polkovnikov called together at 1 o'clock in the afternoon his own conference of the garrison, with representatives of the Central Executive Committee present. Anticipating this move of the enemy, the Military Revolutionary Committee called an emergency conference of the regimental committees at 11 o'clock, and here it was decided to formulate the break with headquarters. The appeal to the troops of Petrograd and the environs drawn up at this meeting speaks the language of a declaration of war. Having broken with the organized garrison of the capital, headquarters is a direct instrument of the counter-revolutionary forces. The Military Revolutionary Committee disclaims all responsibility for the activities of headquarters, and standing at the head of the garrison takes upon itself the defense of revolutionary order against counter-revolutionary attempts. That was a decisive step on the road to insurrection. Or was it perhaps only the next conflict in the mechanics of that dual power that is so full of conflicts? Headquarters, at any rate, tried for its own consolation, so to interpret it, after conferring with the representatives of those units that had not received in good season the summons of the Military Revolutionary Committee. A delegation sent from Smolny under the leadership of the Bolshevik ensign Dashkevich briefly made known to headquarters the resolution of the garrison conference. The few representatives of the troops present reaffirmed their loyalty to the Soviet, but refused to make a decision and dispersed. After a prolonged exchange of opinions, the press so quoted the words of headquarters, no definite decision was adopted. It was thought necessary to await a solution of the conflict between the Central Executive Committee and the Petrograd Soviet. Headquarters thus conceived its downfall as a quarrel between two Soviet institutions as to which one should control its activities. The policy of voluntary blindness had this advantage, that it relieved them of the necessity of declaring war on Smolny, for which act the rulers lacked adequate forces. Thus, the revolutionary conflict, already on the point of breaking out, was once more, with the help of the governmental organs, confined within the legal framework of the dual power. Fearing to look reality in the face, headquarters the more loyally cooperated in camouflaging the insurrection. But was not this light-minded conduct of the powers only a camouflage for their own actual purpose? Did not headquarters intend, under cover of this bureaucratic naivete, to deal an unexpected blow to the Military Revolutionary Committee? Such an attempt upon the part of the distraught and demoralized organs of the provisional government was considered highly improbable in Smolny. The Military Revolutionary Committee, however, took the most simple measures of precaution. And the nearby barrack companies were kept under arms night and day, ready at the first signal of alarm to come to the aid of Smolny. In spite of the calling off of the religious procession, the bourgeois press foretold bloodshed on Sunday. The compromisist paper announced in its morning edition, today the authorities expect a coming out with better probability than of the 20th. Thus, for the third time in 1 week, the 17th, the 20th, the 22nd, this naughty boy had deceived the people with a false cry of wolf. The fourth time, if we can believe the old fable, the boy will fall into the wolf's jaws. The Bolshevik press, in summoning the masses to attend meetings, spoke of a peaceful appraisal of revolutionary forces on the eve of the Congress of Soviets. This fully answered the plan of the Military Revolutionary Committee to carry out a gigantic review without clashes, without employing weapons, even without showing them. They wanted to show the masses their own numbers, their strength, their resolution. They wanted with unanimous numbers to compel the enemy to hide, to keep out of sight, to stay indoors. By exposing the impotence of the bourgeoisie beside their own masses, they wanted to erase from the consciousness of the workers and soldiers the last hindering recollections of the July days. To bring it about that having seen themselves, the masses should say, Nothing and nobody can any longer oppose us. The frightened population, wrote Milikov 5 years later, remained at home or stood aside. It was the bourgeoisie that remained at home, and they really had been frightened by their own press. All the rest of the population thronged out to meetings from early morning to night, young and old, men and women, boys and girls, mother and children in their arms. No meeting like this had been seen before throughout the revolution. All Petrograd, with the exception of its upper strata, was one solid meeting. In those auditoriums, continually packed to the doors, the audiences will be entirely renewed in the course of a few hours. Fresh and ever fresh waves of workers, soldiers, and sailors would roll up to the buildings and flood them full. The petty bourgeoisie of the town bestirred themselves too, aroused by these waves and by those warnings that were supposed to frighten them. Tens of thousands brimmed that immense building known as the House of the People. They filled all the theaters, filled the auditoriums of the theater, their smoke rooms, buffets, and foyers, filled them with a solid and excited and at the same time disciplined mass. From iron columns and upstairs windows, human heads, legs, and arms were hanging in garlands and clusters. There was that electric tension in the air that forebodes a coming discharge. Down with Kerensky, down with the war, power to the Soviets. None of the compromisers any longer dared appear before these red-hot crowds with arguments or warnings. The Bolsheviks had the floor. All the oratorical forces of the party, including delegates to the Congress, who were beginning to arrive from the provinces, were brought into action. Occasionally, left revolutionaries spoke, in some places anarchists, but they both tried as little as possible to distinguish themselves from Bolsheviks. The people of the slums, of the attics and basements, stood still by the hour, in threadbare coat or gray uniform, with caps or heavy shawls still on their heads, the mud of the streets soaked through their shoes, an autumn cough catching at their throats. They stood there packed shoulder to shoulder and crowding even closer to make room for more, to make room for all listening, tirelessly, hungrily, passionately, demandingly, fearing lest they miss a word of what it is so necessary to understand, to assimilate, and to do. It has seemed as though during the months past, the weeks, at least during the very last days, all the words have been spoken. But no, today at least those words have a different sound. The masses are experiencing them in a new way, not as a gospel, but as an obligation to act. The experience of the revolution, the war, the heavy struggle of a whole bitter lifetime rose from the deeps of memory in each of those poverty-driven men and women, expressing itself in simple and imperious thoughts. This way we can go no further. We must break a road into the future. Very inspiring what Trotsky is saying here. You know, the workers are marching in the streets with their weapons, showing their strength. Oh, sorry, they're not with their weapons, but they're outside showing their strength and how unified they are. Once again, very impressive, very inspirational for all of us here, as the Bolsheviks continue to gain more power. Okay? Let's go here. All right. Let's go here. All right. Where were we? Okay. We must break a road into the future. All right. So, everyone who took part in the events here described has subsequently turned his eyes back to that simple and wonderful day, so clearly shining out against the background of the revolution. Vivid enough even without that. The image of that inspired human flood, inspired, and yet in its unconquerable power restrained, is chiseled forever in the memory of those who saw it. The day of the Petrograd Soviet, writes the left social revolutionary Mistovsky, was celebrated at innumerable meetings with enormous enthusiasm. The Bolshevik Tetskovsky, who spoke at 2 factories of the Vasily Ostrov district, says, "We spoke frankly to the masses of the coming seizure of power by us, and heard but words of encouragement. Around me," says Sukhanov, describing a meeting in the House of the People, "there was a mood very near to ecstasy. Trotsky had formulated some brief general resolution. Those in favor, thousands and thousands, raised their hands as one man. I looked at the lifted hands and burning eyes of men, women, boys, workers, soldiers, peasants, and of typically petty bourgeois characters too. Trotsky continued to speak. The multitude continued to hold their hands in the air. Trotsky chiseled out each word. "Let this vote of yours be your oath." The multitude held their hands high. They agreed. They took the oath. The Bolshevik Popov tells of a rapturous oath sworn by the masses to rush out at the first word from the Soviet. Mistivlovsky tells of an electrified crowd taking an oath of loyalty to the Soviets. The same scene was to be observed on a smaller scale in all parts of the city, from center to suburbs. Hundreds of thousands of people, at one and the same hour, lifted their hands and took a vow to carry the struggle through to the end. The daily meeting of the Soviet, the soldiers section, the garrison conference, the factory and shop committees had given inner solidarity to a big group of leaders. Separate mass meetings had united the factories and regiments. But that day, the 22nd of October, welded in one gigantic cauldron and under high temperature, the authentic popular masses. The masses saw themselves and their leaders. The leaders saw and listened to the masses. Each side was satisfied with the other. The leaders were convinced. We can postpone no longer. The masses said to themselves, this time the thing will be done. The success of the Sunday's review of forces by the Bolsheviks shattered the self-confidence of the Polkovnikov and his high command. By agreement with the government and the Central Executive Committee, headquarters made an attempt to come to terms with Smolny. Why not, after all, reestablish the good old friendly customs of contact and compromise? The Military Revolutionary Committee did not refuse to send emissaries for an exchange of opinion. A better opportunity for reconnoitering could hardly be wished. The negotiations were brief, remembers Sadovsky. The representatives of headquarters agreed in advance to all the conditions put forth by the Soviet, in exchange for which the order of the Military Revolutionary Committee for October 22nd was to be annulled. This referred to the document declaring headquarters an instrument of the counter-revolutionary forces. The very same emissaries whom Polkovnikov had so discourteously sent home 2 days ago now demanded and received in their hands for the purpose of their report to Smolny the rough draft of an agreement signed by headquarters. On Saturday, these conditions of semi-honorable capitulation would have been accepted. Today, on Monday, they were already too late. Headquarters awaited an answer that never came. The Military Revolutionary Committee addressed to the population of Petrograd a proclamation explaining the appointment of commissars in the military units and the most important points of the capital and its environs. The commissars, as representatives of the Soviet, are inviolable. Opposition to the commissars is opposition to the Soviet of workers and soldiers, deputies. The citizens were invited in case of disturbances to appeal to the nearest commissar to call out armed forces. That was the language of sovereignty. But still the committee did not give the signal for open insurrection. Sukhanov asks, is Smolny acting stupidly, or is it playing with the Winter Palace like a cat with a mouse, trying to provoke an attack? Neither the one nor the other. The committee is crowding out the government with the pressure of the masses, with the weight of the garrison. It is taking all that it can without a battle. It is advancing its positions without firing, integrating and reinforcing its army on the march. It is measuring with its own pressure the resisting power of the enemy, not taking its eye off him for a second. Each new step forward changes the disposition of its forces to the advantage of Smolny. The workers and the garrison are growing up to the insurrection. Who is to be the first to issue the call to arms will become known in the course of this offensive, this crowding out. It is now only a question of hours. If at the last moment the government finds the courage or the despair to give the signal for battle, responsibility for this will lie upon the Winter Palace. But the initiative, just the same, will have been taken by Smolny. Its declaration of October 23rd had meant the overthrow of the power before the government itself was overthrown. The Military Revolutionary Committee was tying up the arms and legs of the enemy regime before striking him on the head. What a powerful image. It was possible to apply this tactic of peaceful penetration to break the bones of the enemy legally and hypnotically paralyze the remnants of his will, only because of the indubitable superiority of forces on the side of the committee and because they were increasing hour by hour. All right. So let's see. Long live all the 20th century communist state leaders. Let's send this person out of here. We have to send this guy in time out. Okay. I don't know what he is talking about. He is out of order. Sir, named Handheld History 33. If you're in the horizontal live stream, I'm most likely going to read your comments with more dignity, I guess, than in the vertical live stream. But if you spam in the horizontal live stream, that is a violation of the highest order. That is a violation of the highest order. Deal with the actual questions that we are posing here, or with the text, not just random stuff you want to shout. Okay? All right. Let's go here. So, the committee had been studying from day to day the map of the garrison wide open before it. It knew the temperature of each regiment and followed every shift in the view and sympathies of the barracks. A surprise from that side was impossible. There remained, however, some dark shadows on the map. An attempt must be made to eradicate or at least decrease them. It had become clear on the 19th that the majority of the committees of the Peter and Paul Fortress were unfavorably or at least dubiously disposed. Now, when the whole garrison is for the committee and the fortress is caught in a ring, at least politically, it is time to take decisive measures for its conquest. Corporal Blagnarovov, the commissar appointed to the fortress, had met resistance. The governmental commandant of the fortress had refused to recognize the Bolshevik guardianship. There were even rumors of his boasting that he would arrest the young guardian. It was necessary to do something and do it quickly. Antonov offered to take a reliable battalion of the Pavlovsky regiment into the fortress and disarm the hostile units. But that was a too drastic operation, one that might be used by the officers to cause bloodshed and break the unity of the garrison. Was it really necessary to adopt such extreme measures, says Antonov in his memoirs. Trotsky was called in to consider this question. Trotsky was then playing the decisive role. The advice he gave us was a product of his revolutionary intuition, that we capture the fortress from within. It cannot be that the troops there are not sympathetic, he said. And he was right. Trotsky and Lashevich went to a meeting in the fortress. The results of this enterprise, which seemed risky, were awaited in Smolny with the greatest excitement. Trotsky subsequently wrote, "On the 23rd, I went to the fortress at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. A meeting was in progress in the court. The orators of the right wing were in the highest degree cautious and evasive. The soldiers listened to us and they came with us. On the third floor of Smolny, they drew a deep breath when the telephone brought this joyful news. The garrison of Peter and Paul has solemnly promised to take orders henceforth only from the Military Revolutionary Committee." That change in the mood of the fortress troops was not, of course, the result of one or two speeches. It had been well prepared in the past. The soldiers turned out to be far to the left of their committees. It was only the cracked shell of the old discipline that held out a little longer behind the fortress walls than in the city barracks. One tap was enough to shatter it. Blaganov could not confidently establish himself in the fortress, organize his little headquarters, and set up communications with the Bolshevik Soviet of the adjoining district and the committees of the nearest barracks. Meanwhile, delegates from the factories and military units were coming up to see what they could do about getting weapons. An indescribable liveliness now prevailed in the fortress. The telephone rang continually, bringing news of our new successes at assemblies and mass meetings. Occasionally, an unfamiliar voice would announce the arrival at some railroad station of punitive detachments from the front. Immediate investigation would reveal that this was an invention put in circulation by the enemy. That day, the evening session of the Soviet was distinguished by the exceptional number present and the exalted mood. The occupation of Peter and Paul and the fort and the conquest of the Kronoversky arsenal containing 100,000 rifles, this was no small guarantee of success. The spokesman for the Military Revolutionary Committee was Antonov. He drew a picture of the crowding out of the governmental organs step by the agents of the Military Revolutionary Committee. These agents, he said, are being received everywhere as natural authorities. They obeyed not through fear, but through principle. From all sides come demands for the appointment of commissars. The backward units are hurrying to catch up to the advanced. The Preobrazhensky which in July had been the first to fall for the slander about German gold, had now issued through its commissar Chudnovsky a violent protest against the rumor that the Preobrazhenski are for the government. The very idea is regarded as a malicious insult. To be sure, the customary patrol duties are still being carried out, relates Antonov, but this is done with the consent of the committee. Orders of headquarters for the delivery of weapons and automobiles are not being carried out. Headquarters thus had ample opportunity to find out who is the master of the capital. To a question, does the committee know about the movement of government troops from the front and the surrounding districts, and what measures have been taken against this? The spokesman answered, cavalry units were sent from the Romanian front, but they have been held up at Pskov, the 17th Infantry Division. Finding out on the road where and why they had been sent, refused to go. In Venden, 2 regiments successfully resisted the attempt to send them against Petrograd. We have as yet no news about the Cossacks and Junkers supposed to have been sent from Kiev, or the shock troops summoned from Sarko Selo. They do not dare, and they will not dare, lay hands on the Military Revolutionary Committee. Those words sounded pretty good in the White Hall of Smolny. As Antonov read his report, one had the impression that the headquarters of the insurrection was working with wide open doors. As a matter of fact, Smolny had almost nothing to hide. The political setup of the revolution was so favorable that frankness itself became a kind of camouflage. Surely, this isn't the way they make an insurrection. That word, insurrection, however, was not spoken by any one of the leaders. This was not wholly a formal measure of caution, for the term did not fit the actual situation. It was being left to the government of Kerensky, as you might say, to insurrect. In the account of Izvestia, it does say that Trotsky at the session of the 23rd first acknowledged that the aim of the Military Revolutionary Committee was a seizure of power. It is unquestionably true that the original attitude, when the task of the committee had been declared to be a testing out of the strategic arguments of Cheremissov, had long been abandoned. The transfer of the regiments was indeed all but forgotten. But on the 23rd, the talk was still not about insurrection, but about the defense of the coming Congress of Soviets, with armed forces if necessary. It was still in this spirit that the resolution was adopted on the part of Antonov. How were these events estimated in the governmental upper circles? On the night of the 22nd, in communicating to the chief of the headquarters staff, Duke Honen, the news of the attempt of the Military Revolutionary Committee to get the regiments away from the command, Kerensky added, I think we can easily handle this. His own departure for headquarters was delayed, he said, not at all through fear of any sort of an insurrection. That matter could be regulated without me, since everything is organized. To his anxious ministers, Kerensky reassuringly declared that he personally, unlike them, was very glad of the coming attack, since it would give him the opportunity to settle once and for all with the Bolsheviks. I would be ready to offer a prayer, says the head of the government to the cadet Nabokov, a frequent guest at the Winter Palace, that such an attack may occur. But are you sure that you will be able to handle them? I have more forces than I need. They will be stamped out for good. In their subsequent ridicule of the optimistic light-mindedness of Kerensky, the cadets had evidently been a little forgetful. In reality, Kerensky was looking at those events through their own eyes. On the 21st, Milikov's paper wrote that if the Bolsheviks, corroded as they are with the profound inner crisis, dare to come out, they will be put down instantly and without difficulty. Another cadet paper added, a storm is coming, but it will perhaps clear the air. Dan testifies that in the colors of the pre-parliament, the cadets and those grouped around them were talking aloud of their wish that the Bolsheviks might come out as soon as possible. In an open battle, they will be beaten to the last man. Prominent cadets said to John Reed, after being defeated in an insurrection, the Bolsheviks won't dare lift their heads at the Constituent Assembly. During the 22nd and 23rd, Kerensky took counsel, now with the leaders of the Central Executive Committee, now with headquarters. Would it not be advisable to arrest the Military Revolutionary Committee? The compromisers did not advise it. They themselves would try to regulate the question about commissars. Polkovnikov also thought that it would also thought it would hardly be worthwhile to hasten with the arrest. The military forces, in case of need, are more than adequate. Kerensky listened to Polkovnikov, but still more to his friends, the compromisers. He was confidently calculating that in case of danger, the Central Executive Committee, in spite of all family misunderstandings, would come to his aid in time. It was so in July and in August. Why should it not continue so? So we're coming up on the final paragraph right here. We're coming up on the final paragraph. Any comments or questions you have for me, I will read them. Any comments or questions, put them in the chat and we will read them after this final paragraph. Shout out to the Cinemalogian. He says, why did you send that guy to the gulag? I second that. Long live all the 20th century communists and state leaders who just died like everyone else. Okay, now you get to see why you as well are going, because once again, this has nothing to do with the topic. And because I see that you two are a group of trolls, you are forever banished from this channel. You are forever banished from this channel. And just to check out what's on the Cinemalogian's channel, as well as Handheld History, let's check what they're about. The Cinemalogian is posting video games. Once again, a young man who only spends his time playing video games is of no use to our society, and they should be extirpated. Okay? And yeah, Handheld History posts AI videos of bourgeois history. This guy just posts up AI videos. Okay? So, yeah, these people are not welcome on the channel. Let's kick them out. We do not want them here. Okay? All right. I will continue. Final paragraph. Once again, any comments or questions? Once again, any comments or questions, put them in the chat. Okay? But now, it is no longer July and no longer August. It is October. Cold and raw Baltic winds from the direction of Kronstadt are blowing through the squares and along the quays of Petrograd. Junkers in long coats to their heels are patrolling the streets, drowning their anxiety in songs of triumph. The mounted police are riding up and down, prancing, their revolvers in brand new holsters. No, the power still looks imposing enough. Or is this perhaps an optical illusion? At a corner of the Nevsky, John Reed, an American with naive and intelligent eyes in his head, buys a brochure of Lenin's entitled, Will the Bolsheviks Be Able to Hold the State Power? Paying for it with one of those postage stamps that are now circulating in place of money. Very interesting. So Trotsky is saying, like, the government is trying to enforce their power, and yet and still people aren't even using the government's money. They're using postage stamps to do trade and business. Very interesting. So we're wrapping up here. This is the end of episode 41. We will be reading a very exciting chapter just by the title, chapter 41, Lenin Summons to Insurrection, tomorrow. Looking forward to reading that. That sounds like it's going to be fire. Hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. I'm very sad that we had to send some people out to the gulag or the re-education camp, but that is how it goes when you come in here and you are not actively trying to participate in the reading, in the book club, in the discussion. I have no problem getting bots out of here, trolls, fascists. If you want to be banned, just say so. If you want to be banned from this channel, we can easily do that. Just say so, and we can get you out of here. Anyway, we're going to close up the polls now. In the horizontal live stream, we have our favorite poll, Stalin or Trotsky. Socialism in one country first won with 67% of the votes. Permanent revolution got 33% of the votes. And unsure but fuck Trump and MAGA with 3%, got 0. Okay, very interesting. Let's go to the vertical stream and see what the poll results are. Very interested to see what the poll results will say here. All right. Once again, I am always very happy and impressed by the poll results in the vertical stream, because this is where all the fascists gather. This is where the white supremacists, the racists, and the trolls come. And yet and still, the poll results always make me smile. I always smile when I see the poll results, man. Can a revolution legally seize power before openly launching an insurrection? Yes, through mass institutions, only by armed revolt. No, legality blocks revolution. Unsure, but fuck Trump and MAGA. All right. Kirkham Down Stalin says, I'm always tipping the scales of the polls. I guess Kirkham Down Stalin is logging in with like 3 or 4 different accounts to make sure that the right answer gets the best one. But shout out to Kirkham Down Stalin. He is our top commissar here. And yeah, essentially, that is the right answer. Trotsky says... Kirkham Down Stalin says, yeah, just me voting at all is tipping the scales. Okay. I hear you, boy. I hear you. Okay. All right, comrade. Yeah. Anyway, that's the right answer. Trotsky has taught us that, when the workers create institutions that are supported by the masses, yes, that is when that we are ready to overthrow the establishment and have an insurrection. So very, very powerful here. I liked those answers. Shout out to everybody who joined the live stream. I will see you tomorrow for Lenin's call to insurrection, which should be a fascinating and exciting chapter. Thank you for joining. Y'all be easy out there. All power to the people. All power to the people. All power to the people. And peace.